Okay, so today what we're going to be doing is covering lots of different interviewing strategies. Give me just a sec, sorry. My name is Carolyn Darren. I'm a counselor at LA City's Career Center. I'm also a general counselor, and at the end of the presentation, I'm going to share a slide where if you guys want to make an appointment with myself or the other career counselor, you can do that. Oops. So basically, this is our agenda. We're going to talk about what an interview is, ways that you can prepare in advance, things you can do during the interview to do better, and what you can do after the interview to both get better at interviewing and to increase your chance of getting the job. So this is a little bit basic, this slide, but I want you to think about the fact that an interview can be what most of us think of, in that it can be you answering an interviewer's questions, but it can also take the form of a demonstration, a role play, or solving problems. So if somebody contacts you to set up a job interview, it's a really good idea for you to ask them what the interview will be formatted as, so you're not surprised. They might tell you in advance, oh, it's mostly going to be question and answer, but there will be a time for you to role play as a customer at the end. And so knowing that in advance might just help you do better. So it's a good idea to ask the person setting up the interview what the format will be. I'm going to also briefly touch on the different types of interviews that you might encounter. Skipping to the second bullet for now, the one-on-one interview is what most of us think of. Again, that's you, the candidate, answering the questions of the interviewer. Sometimes, though, I'm going to skip to the fourth bullet. It's a panel interview where it's you, the candidate, and you might have two or more people interviewing you at the same time. I'm going to talk briefly about that one. For some people, that format makes them more nervous because it feels more like public speaking. What I want to kind of give you as a tip, though, is if you find yourself in a panel interview where you have more than one person, rather than feeling like, okay, great, now I have like 5 people I have to please, or 5 people to perform for, so to speak, think about the fact that when you have more than one person, there is going to be one of them that is just has a more friendly presence than the others, right? That's just how people are. It might just be that they have just a more friendly demeanor. They might just have a less stern expression on their face. But whatever it is, there's going to be someone in there that you're more comfortable with. And so I'm not telling you to only speak to that person, but having that person there will help. And so again, sometimes when I'm in that situation, sometimes there might just be somebody who's constantly taking notes and never looking at me. Of course, I will still glance at that person just to make sure that if they are looking up, I can make some eye contact with them. But it's okay to, kind of put most of your energy towards the person that's making you feel more comfortable. I'm going to jump back to the first bullet point now, the telephone interview. If you are offered one of these, I want to let you know that this is probably a screening interview. They're trying to decide whether your qualifications are right to bring you in for an actual job interview. If somebody asks to schedule a phone interview with you, though, it's a really good idea to still be prepared for it, because they're going to have your resume or your job application in front of them, and they're going to be asking you questions about it. They might ask you for clarifications about like what duties you had at past jobs, what a job title that you listed means, like what you really did. They might just be confirming the dates that you have on your resume or application. And so most of us don't walk around with that information memorized. So before the phone interview, if nothing else, just have your resume handy, but ideally you would kind of review it and just familiarize yourself with the details. Again, what they're probably doing is confirming whether you actually are qualified for the job, because here's a hint. If you are offered an actual interview for the job, you are already qualified. They've determined that. So let that boost your confidence a bit. What the actual interview is for, we'll get to that later. But know that for a phone interview, they're trying to see if you're qualified. A group interview and virtual interviews. I actually have a separate workshop for these types, but I'm just going to mention them briefly. Group is when you might have one interviewer, but more than one candidate being interviewed all at the same time. And so that's a very special format that, I can talk a lot more about it. But again, we have a separate workshop where we really go into that. And the same with virtual. Those have been around for years, but of course they've become more common with COVID. And there are some strategies you can use to increase your chances. And we do cover that in a separate workshop. Okay, I've already mentioned this, but this is a really strong point that I really want you to remember. Oh, actually, no, this is a little different. Before I was telling you, if you're invited for an interview, get it out of your mind that they're trying to decide if you're qualified, because you are at that point. They're trying to get a feel for like what you're like as a person. And I know that interviewing can be very stressful. Hey, I lead workshops on how to interview and I still find it stressful. And I still kind of beat myself up afterwards, like, oh, I could have said this or that. But I had a realization when I was a lot younger. And once I had this, it really helped me. I stopped thinking about interviews as interrogations where I felt like they were quizzing me and they had all the power and it was my job to impress them. And it was like a one-way street. Of course, as a candidate, yes, it is your job to impress them and to explain why you're qualified and to show them that you would make a great member of their team. But what I realized was working takes up so much of your time, right? That it was important for me to know whether the opportunity I was interviewing for was a good fit for me. And so when I came in there kind of with the attitude, not like in an arrogant way, but like, I'm going to go in there and talk to these people about this job. And yes, they're going to be the ones asking me questions, but I'm going to be evaluating whether I would want to work for this person or whether this job is a good fit for me and where I want to go in my career. So once I kind of had that mind shift, it took some of the interview nerves away. So I'm just going to share with you that advice. Okay, so I mentioned this a little bit before. If you're qualified, what are they looking for? What's the purpose of the interview? And so again, what they're really looking for is what you're like in real life, because on paper, a lot of candidates can look the same. So they want to see, like, what is it like to have a conversation with you? What is your body language like? How do you look? And as far as that goes, it's not so much like what your facial features are, but like, what is your body language? Do you look confident? Are your clothes appropriate? Are you super fidgety or can you kind of compose yourself? So those are the types of things they're looking for. Some of it, like you can see from the text in the yellow box, like personality, fit within the workplace culture. Those are kind of like intangible things that you can't necessarily prepare for exactly. Like you don't know exactly what the work culture is, right? But you can do things that you can present yourself in the best light possible. And we'll get into those a little bit throughout the presentation. They're also looking to see how you do under pressure, because everyone knows, because everyone has to do it, that interviewing is stressful. And so again, they're not expecting you to look like, like a host at the Oscars where you're just so graceful under pressure and you look like you were just born on the stage. It's not that necessarily, but they want to see like if you get flustered, how you recover, that kind of thing. Okay, I've already kind of mentioned the things on the orange, so I'm not going to reread them. I'm just going to move on. Okay, so now I want to talk about how you can prepare for the interview so you can present yourself in the best light. We're going to look at some common questions on the next slide. I've only selected 5 or 6, but you can look at the internet for common interview questions. And you do definitely want to practice your answers to those common questions. First of all, there's always going to be a question similar to, tell me about yourself. It could be phrased, tell me why you're a good candidate for this job. It could be, tell me how your work and educational experiences have prepared you for this job. They're all different versions of tell me about yourself or why are you a good fit for this position. I know that that question feels, it's often the first question you'll be asked. And to me, I always get really overwhelmed because you tell me about yourself. I mean, I could write, what do you want to know? Like I could tell you a million different things, but you know that what they really want to know is tell me about yourself in the context of this job. And so you want to really think about what the job is specifically looking for, and you want to prepare in advance, let's say 3 bullet points in your mind that you can cover to explain to them why you're a good candidate. You know, it could be classes that you've taken, it could be work experience that you've had. Again, even if that work experience is not directly related, you don't think, to the actual new job you're applying for. Let's say that like you're applying for your first professional level job. Maybe you're studying something like media and you've applied for a job as like a sound editor assistant, and you've had maybe some class experience with that, but the only paid work you've had has been at like Target or something. Well, maybe at Target, you actually had to manage many different projects or many different job tasks at once, right? And as a sound editor, you also might have that that requirement. And so if I wanted to, if I'm like, okay, they're going to ask me why I'm qualified to be a sound editor assistant, I would talk about the classes I've taken and the projects I've completed for those classes. But I would also say, and again, I don't really know anything about being a sound editor. That's just the example that came to me. But I would say something like, I know that as a sound editor that, you have to manage many projects at once. And I'm really skilled at that. You know, for instance, when I was a student, I would take like 15 units at a time, and I never missed any late assignments because I have a really good organization pattern or system. I know before I talked about Target, but you could say, you know, I was an assistant manager at the store and I had to keep track of sick days and people's schedules, as well as like, I don't know, shipments. And you could go on to explain a little bit how you managed all those things. So again, you want to think about the most common questions or what you're likely to be asked based on the job description, and write down like an outline of how you would answer that question. And then you want to practice it out loud, ideally in front of a mirror. I know that that probably made you cringe. I hate doing it too, but it will make a tremendous difference. You just don't want the first time you say it out loud to be during the interview, because you might kind of catch yourself and think like, oh, I don't like the way I phrased that. Or you might make the mistake, I'm sure we've all done this during speeches, of thinking like, oh, I'll talk about that example when I make that point. And then you start talking and realize your example is not good. You get the idea. It's really important that you write down like sample likely to be asked answers to questions, and practice it out loud. Ideally, even practice it with somebody that you trust that will give you nice constructive feedback to help you. And that is a service we will be happy to offer to you in the Career Center too. Okay, that was a lot. I'm going to shift gears a little bit now and just talk about some other things that you want to think about as you're preparing yourself. So I've already mentioned this, that when you're offered the interview, ask the person if you can ask how the interview will be formatted or who the interviewers will be. They'll often share that with you. And so it can just help mentally prepare you. Like if they say, oh, you'll be interviewed by your direct supervisor, or they might say your direct supervisor plus the person who currently has your job and plus the manager. So you know there's going to be at least 3. Okay, so ask those questions. Something else that you can do to make yourself a really standout candidate is research the company you're interviewing for. Find out like if they have a mission statement online. Maybe like you're interviewing for a school and it will say something like, we strive to provide like cutting edge, socially just education. So something like that, let's say, and it would say more things, obviously. But if you know that this is a company dedicated to social justice, that's something that you can work into your interview. So again, like maybe they're going to ask you again, let's say this is a teaching position, tell me about a time that you helped a child who was struggling or something. you could bring up an example and, and if it had a social justice component, you could say, and I know that that's part of this school's mission, and that's why I really want to work here. Some other things you can research about the company that you can think about working into your interview responses would be like recent successes the company has had or current projects that they're working on. And those are things you can find off their website, maybe off of their LinkedIn profile, because they'll often post self-promotional stories. And so, if you see something like the company had 20% growth in the last quarter and they talk about why, bring that up in the interview. Again, it depends on the type of job you're applying for, but these are the types of things that make you stand out and make it look like you really are a great fit for that company. Okay. So this orange square has some more practical type tips. And this would be for like an in-person interview. So these are the little details that if you kind of like don't think about them in advance, they can undermine you, because if you show up late or you show up to the neighborhood, but you haven't thought about where to park, and you have to drive around the block 5 times looking for parking, we all know, like even the thought of that makes me stressed. That's not going to help your mindset. So if you're having to show up somewhere in person for an interview, unless you're super familiar with that neighborhood, definitely practice the drive down there and kind of scope out the area. Plan to arrive at least 15 minutes early. I mean, we all know how traffic is in Los Angeles, but if you're late for an interview, that's a terribly, terribly bad look. And so you want to be at least 15 minutes early. I would say half hour early, but I know myself, I tend to like get nervous if I'm just sitting and waiting around. So yourself, but at least 15 minutes early. And then the clothes. We're going to talk about that too in some depth. But what you wear really does matter. You want to dress a little bit above the company dress code. And that's something else you can ask when you're offered the interview, if you don't know that about the company. And we're going to go into some details, but what I mean by this is you want to try on whatever you plan to wear, make sure that like the pants aren't in the wash. That's happened to all of us. After COVID, make sure everything is still fitting you like in the way that you would like it to. Make sure there's no wrinkles, or you get the idea. Again, you just don't want to like go the morning of and you're trying to find like that particular pair of pants, and then you realize like your sister wore them without asking and they're in the laundry. You don't need that stress. So figure out your clothes at least the night before. Okay, so I'm not going to read these all to you. You guys can take a picture of it or just skim it. Or again, the internet has all kinds of lists like this, but these are some very common interview questions that it's really wise to have answers to these questions prepared. Another really common one is tell us about a strength of yours or your greatest strength. And sometimes, again, we sell ourselves short, and we have a hard time talking about ourselves that way, but you want to be prepared for that, as well as tell us about a weakness and what you're doing to overcome it. Something along those lines. Those are very common questions. Okay. So we're going to go into a little more detail now about how you can prepare really good answers for the interview. Do keep in mind that they're very rarely going to ask you a question exactly in the way that you practiced it. So you want to have at least, let's say, 3 to 5 points about yourself that you really want to make sure you get across. So again, you'd want to write those down and practice talking about them so you're familiar. You also, I'm going to go back. You also want to come up with examples that you have experienced that you can use to illustrate your answers. So for instance, let's say, okay, why do you want to work here? I worked with this student last week who is, he studied computer science, and he really wants to work in the computer field, but with a biomedical company, because he himself has used some biomedical equipment when he was in the hospital. Okay, so let's just say he got an interview for a company that made some type of medical equipment. And they said, like this, our company mission is to provide like whatever medical grade gear for the hospital. Why do you think you'd be a good fit to work here? Well, for that company, he would want to talk about, when I was 12 years old, I went into the hospital and there was this machine and it really fascinated me. And I was like, whatever, I spent time looking at it, trying to figure out how it worked. And it really inspired me to like help others, blah, blah, blah. But, he has that example of why, he has this personal connection to medical equipment that maybe not everybody else would have. But for each of the common questions, or again, looking at the job description, or even knowing what the job entails. Like, again, if you're interviewing for something like a retail job, you might not have like a job description. You might have just filled out a job application online. But let's say you're interviewing to be like a barista at a coffee shop or something. You know that you have to memorize like all these drink orders. You have to be friendly, talking to customers and all that stuff, right? So you want to have examples of like how you can learn quickly that menu, how you can be friendly to people, even if it's early in the morning or even if they're upset with you. So you want to have some examples prepared. Okay, so you want to write those down. And then there's this technique called the STAR technique, which I'm going to show you. I don't want you to get too wrapped up in like exactly doing it according to the letters. But this can be a really great way for you to craft interview answers or question answers. So the STAR technique, it stands for situation, task, action, and result. So this is a way, again, for you to structure your responses. So here's an example. Let's say the question was, tell me about a time you took action to make things better. So here's a quick example I came up with, and I've labeled each little sentence with what it correlates with in this STAR anagram. So in my role as an after-school aide, I often had to interact with stressed parents. So that's like the situation, right? Task. It was part of my job to make sure the parents signed their children out when they came for pickup. Sometimes parents would seem annoyed with this as they wanted to get home as soon as possible. So that one, it kind of jumps back to situation. So it's kind of like, this is the scenario. Task is like what you were supposed to be doing within the scenario. And when I said to you before, don't get too wrapped up with this anagram, that's what I meant. Like, it's sometimes situation and task can feel like the same thing. So don't stress about like, what letter does this go with? It's more like describe the situation and then action. This is really important. This is what you did. I decided to move the sign out clipboard to closer where the parents help their children gather their belongings. That was the action. And then what happened? The result. I noticed that once the clipboard was closer to where the parents were, they were less stressed about signing their kids out. So again, this is like just a really small example, but it does show that this person took some initiative and made things better at their workplace. So again, like I like to share this technique, but I like with caution. Don't be overly stressed about like, what is the situation? What was the task? Because those can often be intertwined. Okay, so we're going to shift gears and talk about clothes. I wish that people didn't make judgments based on how people look, but it is the case that they will. Remember that you have to look as well put together as you can. Because it's part of what they're perceiving about you. If you're dressed appropriately and groomed well, they're going to translate that to this person is a professional type person who would fit into our company, okay? Like I mentioned before, you want to dress at the same level that the people who work at the company dress at, or even a step above. And I will go into specifics in the next slides. Details matter. Fit, wrinkles, pet hair, scuff shoes. Again, this stuff seems incredibly superficial to me, but again, I think there's a lot of unconscious judgment that we make on each other. And so you just want to make sure that everything is as perfect as possible. I know you've probably read ahead to these other bullet points, so I'm going to skip a little bit. But again, I hate to tell students this because I don't want to discourage you from interviewing, but a backpack doesn't look very professional. You want to have some type of professional looking carry-all, whether it's a small purse or whether it's like a portfolio that looks professional, even if it's a plain black folder for you to, have like maybe some extra resumes in or something like that. Just don't bring a backpack. It doesn't look very professional or polished. Okay, so there are 2 different slides here. We have 4 different common kind of like company work codes, dress codes, excuse me. So the first one is casual. This is not very common, but I know like, in the technology field or in some startups, I've heard that people can just wear to come to work in like flip-flops and basketball shorts. And if that's the culture for the company you're interviewing for, you want to bump up to the next level, which would be smart casual. So you see between like the men's dress code here, like this guy's wearing a t-shirt, short, and tennis shoes, whereas this guy here has like a button shirt, slacks, and nicer shoes. He's not in a business suit. That might be a little bit too, like they might look at you in a business suit and think like, oh, they wouldn't fit in with us. That person's too formal if they had a casual dress code. I would honestly say the 2 women's outfits that are represented here, the only real difference is the shoes. The sample woman here has kind of like sandals on, whereas here she has like dressier sandals, and the shirt's tucked in, but these are pretty similar outfits. Okay. I would say for most like professional settings, this business casual is kind of like what's normal. This is probably like maybe what like teachers wear, things like that, but maybe not without the jacket. But you can see, okay, let me just point a few things out. So the man, it's not a true suit. He has like slacks and a sport coat, no tie. The shirt's not buttoned all the way. Although he has like business type shoes on, and the woman has again like a button down shirt. She has it tucked in. She's wearing heels, which you don't have to wear heels, but these are not sandals. Again, this is like a business casual. If the place you were interviewing for was a little more relaxed, like again, maybe this is more like, a teaching thing, the smart casual, then you want to dress a little bit nicer. And again, you could dress in the business professional way, but the business professional is very formal. This is more like, let's say, accountancy firms, business, law, things like that. And again, I would say you can never go wrong with business professional. It's certainly appropriate for like the business casual workplace as well as the smart casual workplace. But if it's a true casual one, it might be a little bit too much of a step up. Again, how do you find this out? Whoever calls to schedule your interview, ask what the company dress code is if you don't know. The other thing I will say is these things often are the same throughout an industry. You heard me say before, like if you're going for a teaching position, either one of these looks would be fine. Smart casual is probably kind of how people actually go to work. If you're getting into, again, let's say something in TV or film production, people really go to work in the casual or smart casual way. But again, ask your professors in those fields if you're not sure, or ask someone you know in those fields if you're not sure. Okay, so interviews, as much as preparing what to say and how to get there and how you look, interviews can be extremely nerve-wracking. And so it's really wise to think in advance about how you are going to handle your interview nerves so they don't tank your interview. Okay, so the first thing I want to say, and I know I've said it a few times, being nervous is 100% normal. I would say 99% of people are nervous when they interview. So if you start getting nervous, don't be hard on yourself. You're just human. It's normal. Like I said before as well, interviewers know you're nervous. Don't feel like if you do something that betrays your nerves, like if you stutter, if you lose your train of thought, if you catch yourself like kicking your foot or something, don't think like, oh, now they're not going to hire me because they know I'm nervous. They already know. They're making allowances. So just let it go. Don't apologize for your nerves. Don't like walk in and, first thing you say, oh, thanks for meeting with me, but I'm so nervous. They don't want to know that. You want to project confidence, even if you're not feeling it. And we're going to talk about some strategies that you can use to calm yourself down in real time. These are things just like anything else that get better with practice, and some techniques work better for some people than others. But let's kind of go through it. So this one's really basic. Remember to breathe. When I get nervous, I don't exhale. I hold on to my breath, and that's very common. And so if it's like the lead up to your interview and you notice yourself tensing up, hold on, I just noticed a message in the chat. Yeah, so somebody's saying they breathe slowly before starting and they've practiced that with yoga. That's great. Yeah, so you've already got some practice here. Well, something I will do is I will actually like breathe in for the count of 4, hold it for the count of 6, and then exhale for the count of 6. And yeah, if it's during the interview, that's going to be awkward and weird. But again, like in the lead up to the interview, this can really help center yourself and calm you down. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, progressive relaxation. This is an incredibly common relaxation technique. What you basically do is you pick either your hands or your feet to start with. And let's see, I'm just going to do my hands because you can kind of see them. You clench your fists for, let's say, 5 seconds. And then you release them and you like mindfully try to like relax those muscles for 5 seconds. And then the next muscle that you can tense, which is kind of like my biceps, you like kind of moving up your body, you tense them and relax them for 5 seconds. And then, you might do your shoulders next. You can do that either, again, starting with your hands or starting with your shoulders, starting with your feet. But again, that's something you can do while you're sitting in a reception area and no one will notice you're doing it. And what you're actually doing is because you tense your muscle up, once you release it, it will be more relaxed than if you had just told yourself like, relax. The other thing that you're doing is taking your mind off of like your nerves. So rather than like, oh, I wish they would hurry, I wish they would come, oh, I'm so nervous. Now you're thinking about tense, relax. So it kind of takes you out of some negative thinking that can happen. Okay, this tip, I'm not kidding you. I heard this from our college president a few years ago. I was at a presentation. She was on a panel actually giving advice on how to get jobs in colleges. And she said what she does is during an interview, now this would be during the actual interview. This is something you can do, especially if you're somebody who tends to like jitter your foot or your knee a lot. Push one of your feet into the ground and do it mindfully. And what you're doing is you're sending all your nervous energy into the ground, into that foot. And so again, this is something you can do even live in front of people and no one knows you're doing it. And it's a way for you to direct some of that actual nervous energy. The last, positive self-talk, even if you mess up. Honestly, it might not be as bad as you think. Just be easy on yourself. Remember, it's a learning experience. And even if you're not doing great in this particular interview, it's great to have the experience of interviewing because we get stronger when we practice. And practicing in the real situation versus like with a career counselor or by yourself is the best way to get better. So it's never a waste to go on an interview. Okay. We're kind of winding down. I know this is a lot of information. We're kind of in the last third here. We're in the home stretch. So here's some things you can do during the interview. Number 1, you want to smile. And this is my little like quick tip for if you have a virtual interview. You know how when you like log into a Zoom room and the host has not started the meeting, you get that message that says, the host will let you in soon. As soon as you see your camera icon light up, don't be like this and waiting for them to address you because this is the first thing they see. And that doesn't look too dynamic. Instead, as soon as you see that they're coming, that they turned on the camera, you're like this. And it's awkward and weird to be smiling at nothing, but that's the first impression they're going to have of you, is smiling and openness and eagerness. If it's in person, of course, same thing. They're approaching you with their hand out, they're calling your name. You're going to smile and give them your most open and engaging look. You're going to shake their hand firmly and tell them it's nice to meet them. And even if you're like doing jumping jacks inside, you want to try to come across as confident. Keep eye contact, keep your shoulders back. Don't do one of these, or, you know, one of these crouches. That's what we do to try to like protect ourselves. But even if you feel like all you want to do is crawl into the floor, keep those shoulders back and sit tall. Confident voice tone. If you, again, like we're all in different stages of growth, and this is definitely getting really good at interviewing is something that's a process. If you tend to be somebody who's a little more soft-spoken, or it's hard for you to talk about yourself, practice. And it's one of those like fake it until you make it. Even if you don't feel confident or it makes you uncomfortable to talk about like how great you are, you have to do it. If you don't believe in yourself, they're not going to believe in you either. So you've got to push yourself to do it. Okay, I talked about this a little bit. If this is a panel interview and you've got more than one interviewer, you need to like spread the love of your eye contact around the room. It doesn't have to be exactly 50-50 or 30-30-30 if they're like 3 people. Again, you're gonna have that one person who's you're gonna be more comfortable with. You can look at them most of the time, but you must look at everybody. Even if, like, let's just say John asked you a question, be sure to start by responding to John, but also look at George and Sarah during your answer at some point. Try to keep track of time. Some interviews will tell you we have 8 questions and we have 30 minutes. They're not going to time you. You have to do that, and that can be tough. But again, you want to quickly do the math. Okay, that's about 3 minutes a question, and try to target for that. Our arms, I know, like especially if it's live and you're sitting in a chair, try to just like have your arms kind of folded gently in your lap. It can feel awkward, like what am I going to do with my arms? Just don't sit on your hands. Again, myself, when I'm nervous, I do this. You might have already, maybe I've done that a few times during this because I want to make sure I do it well. You want to try to avoid this. If you catch yourself doing it, again, it's not the end of the world. Just kind of start resting your hands in your lap. Remember, be kind to yourself. They know you're nervous. I put this in here because I've been going and you want to breathe. Now, let's say we've been in the interview for a few moments. Our nerves are coming back. Maybe they asked you something that threw you. Exhale. You can do it subtly to help center yourself and remind yourself you're doing great. If they ask you a really long question, or maybe you just get nervous and forget the question, it's okay to ask them to repeat it. If they ask you like a multi-part question, everyone tells everyone not to do this. But sometimes they might be like, our workplace is very fast paced. Tell me about a time you worked in a fast paced setting, and also a time that you settled a conflict. You're like, whoa, how do I direct that? How do I order that? You might really quickly think, oh, I'm going to talk about A and B, go. You talk about A and you lost track of what B was, totally fine to say, I think there was another part to that question. Would you please repeat that for me if I didn't answer the whole thing? Totally fine. Remember, it's a conversation, not an interrogation. Okay, now it's winding down to the end of the interview. You definitely want to, again, leave them with a great impression. You want to warmly thank them each and sincerely thank them for their time. If they haven't already told you when they're going to be making a decision, it's fine to ask them, when can I expect to hear back? Or what would the next step be if I'm invited for the next round? Also, this last one, you want to be prepared for a few questions that you can ask at the end. It's very normal for them to say to you, that's the questions we have for you. Now, do you have any questions for us? It looks bad if you just say, no, I'm good. It doesn't make it look like you, again, were conversing. It doesn't make you look very thoughtful or engaging. So you want to walk in the room with a few questions in your back pocket. Again, you can Google this and come up with a list that you feel comfortable with. But these are some that I often would rely on, or I know that these are very applicable to different fields. Notice though, these questions, they're not about like start date, they're not about salary, they're not about benefits. Those are things that you will work out when they offer you the job, not now. You want these questions to show them that you are a thoughtful and somebody that they would want to work with. So for instance, the top question, that's one of my go-tos. Can you tell me about growth opportunities for this position? That makes it look like you want to grow and also that you want to stay with that company for a while. Another one of my standbys is, does this position offer opportunities for continued education? Again, showing that you care about your work and you always want to get better. I just want to say real quick about these post-interview questions. Sometimes they will take your question away by bringing that information into the interview. So let's just say, okay, that education question, like, does this position support ongoing education? They might ask me a question in the interview, like, this position expects that you would attend the annual convention. Would you be open to traveling for that convention? And they might say, this is so you can stay current in the field. Well, that kind of tells me that already answers that question. And if I ask that, that's going to make it look like I didn't really remember. So sometimes that's why it's a good idea to have a couple questions, but also sometimes during the interview, they might again tell you something through one of the questions. And if I kind of want to know more about it, I'll put that aside and then I'll remember to ask about it during the questions. And again, that makes it look like you are engaging in the process and you're not just walking in with like a list of set questions. Okay, guys, we're almost there. Oh, audience participation portion. What do you do if you forget the question that you were asked? Anyone have any ideas? Oops, sorry. Okay. It's totally fine if you forget the question, if you just ask them to repeat it. It's totally fine. And again, remember that if they asked you a really long question and you kind of got lost in there about what they really wanted, it's fine to, answer in whatever way it comes to you. And it's fine to ask them, was that what you were wanting to know? Or was there something else that you would like me to add? Or is there another part of that question I did not address? It's totally fine to do that. Okay, I want to also talk about this one. What do you do if they ask you a question and you aren't sure what to say or how to answer? Like you did not prepare for this and you didn't expect it. Or you've never had the experience they're asking you to share about. So this one happened to me once. I was asked to please tell about a time that you resolved a conflict between two coworkers. I never had been in a position to do that. So it threw me and I felt flustered. But what you can do if they ask you something that you just never experienced or you just really aren't sure is you can pivot and answer either a hypothetical situation, like what you would do, or provide them with a related answer. So for instance, a redirect. That's a great question. I've never been in that situation, but if I were, this is what I would do. And so I might say, for instance, with that conflict between coworkers thing, I might say I would want to like give each of them a chance to explain what their position was. And then I might refer back to the company or the department's mission and decide which of their responses was more in line with the mission or something. Another way you can do this is talk about something similar. So maybe they talk about, again, let's say you part of our goal of this company is to always have satisfied customers who are happy. What would you do if a customer was angry because they couldn't return something because it was past the return deadline? How would you calm them down? And so, you might never have dealt with an angry customer, but maybe you have dealt with like an angry classmate or an angry sibling or something, and you could talk about the techniques you use in that situation. So again, if they ask you something that you just don't know how to answer, talk about what you hypothetically would do in the situation. Or if it's something you don't have experience in, you can talk about something similar. Transferable skills matter. Okay, last portion, I promise we're getting there. After the interview, this is where you can make yourself a better interviewee. Write down all the questions that you were asked. I know it's going to seem really vivid to you at the time, and you're going to think, I'll remember, but you won't. So write them down, because I promise there's going to be a couple in there that you didn't anticipate, and you want to practice that one if you ever come across it again. Be honest with yourself about which questions you could have answered better. So, if you know that there was that one question that you kind of like didn't have a good answer for, be honest. So you can, again, work on your answer to that question if you're ever presented with it again. Now, the thank you email or thank you text. This is really, really important. Within 24 hours, you want to send them a thank you. And in that thank you, you want to genuinely thank them for taking the time to meet with you. And you want to personalize it. You want to, let's say, remind them why you're a great candidate for the job. You want to remind them why you want to work at their company or why you think you'd be a good fit. The other thing you could do is, it's very common. We've all had the experience of like having an interview or a conversation with someone, and you leave out some really great information. And you're like, oh, why didn't I remember to talk about this? You can put it in that follow-up and say, after our interview concluded, I realized that I didn't mention blah, blah, blah. And I just wanted you to know this about me because I feel it fits in with the job, because, again, you're not writing a book. You want it to be something that they can open and read like in 30 seconds, but you definitely want to do it. It does show interest, and it really can remind them why you're a good candidate. We're there, we're done. Okay, so the next steps you can do. If you have an interview coming up and you want to practice, you can absolutely make an appointment with a career counselor, and we would be happy to practice with you. We will give you constructive feedback, and we will not be mean to you, I promise. You can attend another workshop. We have lots of them. You see the QR code on the left has a link to our current workshop offerings. And then the QR code on the right is our Instagram page if you want to follow us. We post all kinds of stuff throughout the campus, but also just little career tips and also reminders about upcoming workshops.